Good evening. Tonight, let's get started on this Stihl 028. I'll meet you over at the workbench. Good evening. Welcome back to my workbench. It's late here tonight. I'm going to get started in this and we'll see how far we get. So tonight we have this Stihl 028 wood boss, and the customer says that this is his grandfather's saw. It starts and it runs. Sometimes it stalls. He wants it serviced. He wants it completely gone over. It has family sentimental value. So he wants it in tip-top shape. First thing I'll do is just a quick visual: plastics, handles, bar chain, all that stuff. Get that out of there. So the bar is not original. It looks recently replaced. The chain looks pretty good, fairly sharp. Chain brake works. Chain catcher is intact. Just looking at the plastics, the handles, underneath the fuel tank, it looks pretty good. Looks pretty dirty, and through where I can see through the recoil, it looks like there's a bit of a dirt buildup. So this saw says made in West Germany. So I see quite a few 028s in every year for service and repair. And to my recollection, all of them, here's another one, Virginia Beach, USA. This is what most of them say on them. So I wonder why this was made in Germany, if they were making them at the same time, switched factories. Maybe someone on here knows more about this. I'd be really interested to know. If you know something about this, leave it in the comments. So before I do too much to this, I want to take it outside and see if I can get it to start and how it runs. So I'm going to check the fuel and then we'll head outside and see what's up. There's about half a tank of fuel. I'll just pull a little sample out from the bottom. We'll see what it looks like. Lots of stuff floating around. I don't see any water, but I'll dump it out and we'll have a closer look. I'll pour it into a glass jar so that you can see it better. I'm going to stir this up so you can see what's floating in here. Hopefully you can see what I'm seeing. That's a lot of crud floating in there. Very cloudy. That's a bad fuel sample. I don't want to put that back in the saw, so I'm not going to. The fuel filter looks like it's from 1977. I'm going to try to show you down in the tank there. There's the fuel filter. The screen material is very dark. I think it's the original fuel filter, but we'll see it closer when I pull it out. So I don't see a lot of dirt in the tank. I think it all came out in the fuel, so that's good. Let's put some fresh fuel in it and let's step outside with it. Yep, lots of bar oil. Okay, let's go outside and see what this thing runs like. I'll meet you out there. Okay, so the 028 starts easy, accelerates as I would expect it to. Idle, very unstable idle. It doesn't want to, if you stop pulling the trigger, it will just die. It could be a fuel issue. It could be an air leak. We're going to find out exactly what it is, and we're going to fix it. Let's get started. I'm going to pull the bar and chain off of it. I'm going to dump the fuel out of it, and we'll get started. So it looks like this saw oils without any problem. The sprocket, very worn, so we'll be replacing that as well. Chain catcher is probably original. Looks like it's had a couple derails, but this saw may not have a lot of use. I'm a little bit OCD. I like my work area clean. Let's take the air filter cover off and see what's going on under here. What we have here is a winter air filter. So in Canada, when it's cold, not dusty, damp, this would be the air filter you'd use. And then you'd normally have a felt type air filter for summer, dustier conditions. So we're going to take this air filter off. The spark plug, from what I can see, looks newer. The tank vent, which is that dark hose right in there, looks original. Looks kind of crispy, but I can hear it now that I've dumped the fuel out. I can hear air moving here, so the tank vent is probably working just fine. So let's take the air filter off and let's pull that spark plug out and have a look down in the engine. The running symptoms that we've seen outside don't strike me as a fuel tank vent issue. I'm leaning towards an air leak in the saw, possibly a leak in crank seal, and probably fuel system issues as well. It's probably a combination of the two, but you're going to come along with me and we're going to find out if this saw has an air leak. Let's get this air filter off. Let's get that spark plug out. That spark plug spins out of there nice and easy. It looks like a newer plug, but fouled up. While the saw is still warm, let's do a compression test, and then we'll have a look down into the cylinder with my camera. Got my compression tester here. This is made by Echo. So I'm going to hold it on wide open throttle, and we'll see what kind of compression this has. So it looks like 155. That's really good compression. Okay, so we're seeing some carbon buildup on top of the piston, some light scoring on the cylinder walls. So this saw would run if you kept pulling the throttle. It's a good idea that someone stopped using it, or they likely would have destroyed this saw. But everything looks pretty good in here. While I've got my camera out, let's pull the muffler off this and we'll have a look from the other side. 2 T27s. The spark arrestor is right here. It's hard for you to see it, but it's hard to shine light through it. It's perfectly clean. That's not our running issue. See all this stuff falling out of it. Black, lots of carbon. Here we're seeing the intake side of the cylinder. The camera makes it look worse than it really is. And the piston, you can see the machining marks on it. It's hard to see the way the light is shining on the camera, but the piston looks good and the cylinder wall's fine. With a pick, you can't feel any of those lines. If any of you want the camera I'm using, this is what I have right here. I just got it a couple weeks ago. It's amazing. So let's take the top cover off the saw and go ahead with our pressure vac test. 2 T27s going through the top and a flat head on the side right there. Under where the muffler was here, there's quite a buildup of oily sawdust. The base gasket is in there. In the past, on other saws, I have found base gasket leaks when doing a pressure vac test, and also seen this buildup at the same time. I don't know if it's related, but just something I thought I'd point out. Let's go ahead and seal our exhaust port up. You can also use your muffler as your block if you don't have this. This way you can see better what I'm doing. So I've just put those in by finger. This is still loose, and I'm going to slide my rubber down in behind it and seal it up. Okay, our muffler is sealed up. We'll put our spark plug back in and take the carburetor off. Now that I can see better here, the tank vent, it's working, but it's in very poor condition. And the fuel line, it's cracked up. I don't know if it's leaking, but it's full of cracks. I like to test the fuel line from the filter end, but this saw, the fuel line is so short, it's very hard to test it. So when I have it out, I'll test it to see if it's leaking or not. Let's pull the carb off this. 8 mil. That wasn't even tight. I could have just taken it off with my finger. And neither of them were tight. So far, I found these 2 carb nuts. They weren't on tight. The spark plug looks newer, and a couple of the muffler bolts weren't really on that tight either. So I wonder if somebody's been working on this. Would that surprise you? It wouldn't surprise me. Let's disconnect the throttle link. That was easy. I'm going to remove the fuel line off the carburetor and remove the impulse line and then pull this carb off. I've got my fancy little Stihl fuel line removal tool here. Ken's Small Engines, if you're watching. I got a new one, so there's the part number. It's not wore off yet. Pretty handy. Okay. Fuel line is disconnected and the impulse is disconnected, and there's our carburetor. Tillotson. So the idea of this tool is Stihl doesn't want you grabbing onto this fuel line with pliers and pulling it off and possibly damaging it and then thinking, oh, there's my problem, you know, it's cracked. This tool, you get behind the fuel line and they want you to push it off, not pull it off. So pretty neat tool, very inexpensive. But I think if you want one of these, you just have to go to your Stihl dealer and buy one. Just request that part number. I just noticed this. Made in Germany. Ooh, fancy. Go get yourselves one. Let's go ahead and plug up our intake and our impulse. So for this saw, this tool fits many different saws. That there is going to plug our impulse up. Got to keep that wire out of the way. There we go. Impulse is plugged up. Put these washers on first. I use them so the nuts don't damage the tool. 8 mil. So we've got our intake and our impulse sealed up. We've got our spark plug hole sealed up with the spark plug. We have our exhaust port all sealed up. No decompression valve on this saw to worry about. So we're going to go ahead with our vacuum and pressure test. So we are looking for crank seal leaks, intake leaks, base gasket leaks, any possible leak. If there's a leak, I'm going to find it. Got my pressure vac tester. I bought this from Stihl. Hook the line up to the port right there. I'm going to test vacuum first. So this is vacuum, this is pressure. I'm going to pull vacuum to 0.5 bar, which in PSI is around -7. We have a So as you could see there, I was losing vacuum. I have another one of these tools. I want to double check this, so I'm hooked up with my other tool. So let's go to vacuum. So I want to go to 0.5 bar, which is that bigger black line at the tip of my finger. So I can get there, but it will not hold there. and I can't build any more vacuum. See that? Let's go over to pressure. Let's go to 0.5 bar. Look at that, it holds pressure. This is why you do a vacuum test and a pressure test. So this leak shows up on the vacuum test, but this saw would probably sit here and hold pressure for a month if I walked away. So let me release this and go back to vacuum again. Okay. So what's happening is when I hit 0.5 bar, the seal can't hold that vacuum. It drops enough just to the point where it can seal again. So if this leak was coming from one of my connections, it would leak vacuum and pressure. This is classic crank seal in my experience. It could be something else, but I'm betting on a crank seal leaking. We're gonna find out for sure. So there's a crank seal on the clutch side. There's a crank seal on the flywheel side. I don't know which one is leaking. I think it's only one of them leaking, but we will replace both of them while we're doing it. So let's dig in and find out. I'm gonna hook my tester. I've been asked several times in the comments why I would do both a vacuum and a pressure test, and this perfectly demonstrates why. Let's take the spark plug back out. Recoil's coming off. T27s, 4 of them. It's late. That's enough for tonight. I'll get back into this first thing tomorrow morning. Let's remove the flywheel. Piston stop is in. Flywheel puller. Flywheel's removed. That's the crankshaft. And there's the crank seal right there. I'm going to put some oil on this crank seal, and then I'm going to pull vacuum, and we're going to watch for the oil to get sucked in the crank seal. I've got my tester right here, and I'm on vacuum. See the oil going away there? See it moving? Gone. So as I put the engine under vacuum, that oil is getting sucked through the seal into the engine. See that? That's a leaking crank seal. We know that the flywheel side crank seal is leaking, so we're going to replace both of them. So let's take the clutch off. Just out of curiosity, I moved my tester over to pressure just to see how this crank seal would react. This is not a crank bearing problem. That is super tight. There's no play there. It's that crank seal. Got 5 T27s to take out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's remove the brake spring. Safety glass is on. Let's remove the oil pump drive gear. Just going to gently pry up in this. Okay. Clutch drum, we'll take that off. Bearing. Got my piston stop back in. Here's the clutch side crank seal. We'll see if it's leaking as well. I'll put some oil on it. I'll pull a vacuum to 1/2 bar. I can hear the other side leaking. That's my reflection, my hand there. I don't think this side has a leak. I'll move it over to pressure. And we'll just see what happens. I can hear the other side leaking. I wonder if you can hear that if I put my mic up close. Flywheel key, I removed it out of the crankshaft. Now let's pull this crank seal out. This is a seal puller. I got this from Stihl, but you can get them all kinds of places. Amazon, they're aftermarket. Okay, let's go after this crank seal. pulling out. There it is. Oh, here's the crank seal I took out. Kind of wrecked them, taking them out. Lots of dirt down in the groove. So here's the new one. This is OEM from Stihl. Let's put it in. Let's go ahead and put the new crank seal in. So I'm going to get a little bit of grease on my finger here. Just grease the lips of the seal up. I'm going to slide this down in the crankshaft. The keyway right there. You want to avoid touching the keyway. So when I put it on, I'm going to keep it pulled away from that. You don't want to risk tearing the crank seal. Here's my seal driver. This is from Stihl. Slide that down on there. That's installed. Perfect. The service manual says to use an arbor press to push that in. I just use a swing press and it works fine. Let's flip the saw over and replace the clutch side crank seal as well. Let's remove this crank seal. And there's that one out. The crank bearings look really good. Nice and clean in there. Crankshaft is tight, no play. There's the crank seal I just took out. So it's damaged just from me pulling it out. It wasn't leaking, but crank seals are like socks. When one of your socks has a hole in it, the other one's not usually too far behind. The threads on the crankshaft, they're kind of jagged, and I don't want to wreck my crank seal slipping them on there. So I have this little tool from Stihl that just slips on there, and then I can slip my crank seal down on without damaging it. So I'll just put some grease on it, and then we'll install it. And that's just gonna slide down there. And I'll slide my seal press. On this side, we put the big end down, just like that. I'll grab my swing press. There we go. New crank seal installed. Now that those are in, let's go ahead and test for vacuum again and make sure these aren't leaking before we put the saw back together. A pressure vac test tool. So go to vacuum. You go to 0.5 bar. I would say that our vacuum leak is taken care of. And let's do a pressure test while we're here. Go to 0.5 bar. Just wiggle the engine a bit, wiggle the intake boot. And we are holding steady. No vacuum leaks, no pressure leaks. We had one bad crank seal. We replaced both of them. I'm going to go ahead and put the saw back together now, and then I'll meet you at the carburetor. I took the saw outside and just gave it a quick cleanup. I'll put it back together now. I'm going to remove the fuel filter, and then I'm going to pull the fuel line out. That could be the original fuel filter. These ones come apart. Let's take this apart and see what it looks like inside. Maybe these were serviceable at one time. Maybe you'd take this out and put a new one in. Anybody know? I'm gonna pull this fuel line out. So this fuel line is a lot of cracking. You see that in there? But let's just see. It wasn't leaking. I had to step away on this day to work in another part of the shop for a bit, and this saw the repair had to keep going. So Tyler stepped in, replaced the fuel line, and did some carburetor work. Please enjoy. Installing a new tank vent. We'll take the carb apart for a look. Everything in here looked pretty good. The diaphragm looked okay. The carb was clean inside, but due to the age of this saw and already being in here, we're going to just rebuild it anyways. The needle and seat passed the test. The pump side of the carburetor is clean. The screen is clean. So the 028 starts really easy. It runs well. As you can see, my log back there is almost gone, so I'm going to have to get a new one set up. So the case is closed on the Stihl 028. So we replaced both crank seals. One was leaking, but we did both of them anyways. New fuel line, carb rebuilt. I did replace the clutch springs and the drum. So this is a nice running little saw, and I think it's ready to go home. We've got lots of saws waiting to be worked on. I'll see you at the bench with the next one. Thanks for watching.